But the next is scripture. So after prayer is scripture. And I just want to read Psalm 1 through 4. It should be on your paper. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaves do not wither, and all that he does, he prospers. So scripture, or the law, as in Psalm 1, when we fix our minds on it, when we meditate on it, when we dwell on it daily, we become like a tree planted by water that produces fruit all around us. And actually, if you continue on through Psalm 1, it actually says that in every season, that tree produces fruit. It does not falter. It does not wither. In every season. And so scripture to us is like that river, and we're that tree planted by it. And so we get to fix our minds on it. I just want to talk about two ways that we can form ourselves through scripture. Two ways. And that is meditation and memorization. Meditation, memorization. Double M's for those who love alliteration. But I think what meditation and memorization help us do is they actually help us form ourselves towards scripture to create spiritual intimacy, not just spiritual knowledge. Because that is the temptation with scripture is now, hey, look all the things I know about Exodus. I can talk to you about all of these cool movements that God does about Exodus. And you just bored the person you're talking to, across the street or across the table. They don't care. Or we just become this person who knows all these facts, all these things, but again, isn't actually transformed. And so meditation and memorization, I think, can actually shape us towards spiritual intimacy. Meditation, actively ponder the story and truth of Scripture. Actively ponder the story of truth in Scripture. Who here has watched a movie multiple times? Brett's not going to raise his hand. Brett's not a multiple movie watcher, but mostly everyone else did, so we'll figure out who's the normal one, who's the abnormal one later. I love to watch movies multiple times. I love seeing the nuance. You pick up on little things, and when you watch a movie over and over again, you begin to see things and know things about that movie that aren't just the mega themes or aren't just the parts that everyone else knows. You actually begin to pick up on all these little things. For example, one of my favorite movies of all time, this is probably going to surprise no one, is the movie The Sandlot. I love that movie. It's what I grew up on. Brings back all the memories. I've seen the movie probably 1,000 times. And so because I've seen that movie 1,000 times, one of the most famous scenes is when the two rival baseball teams are confronting each other, and the one guy says, "Hey, you play ball like a girl," which now I have girls, so I'm a little offended by that. But he says, "You play ball like a girl," and they have this big standoff, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go at them." Well, right before that scene, they're walking towards one another, and one of the players, they're all throwing their gloves down. My guess is this was not what was supposed to happen. One of the players throws his glove, and instead of hitting the ground, throws it behind him, and actually just drills one of the other actors in the stomach. And it's really funny. Every time I point it out to someone, they've lost it. They think it's one of the funniest parts. It's become one of my favorite parts of that famous scene. I know that part in the scene because I've seen that movie way more than anyone should see that movie. But the same idea applies, that all great art, and Sandlot is great art, and believe it or not, I'm going to somehow compare the Sandlot to Scripture, but all great art, can be pondered multiple times. And so with Scripture, the greatest piece of art can be pondered and meditated on multiple times because there's layers and layers of things for us to grasp, ways for it to actually get inside us. So the story of Scripture, the more and more we ponder the full story of Scripture, the more and more it becomes a part of us, the more and more it's ingrained in us, the more and more we can pick up on its themes, its movements, new ways that God moves. And just the truth as well, not just instruction for how to live, we actually begin to find new ways and new applications for the truth that stands. The truth doesn't necessarily change, but the way we apply it to us, the way it applies to our life changes from time to time. I read a passage now, post kids, 30 years old, differently than I did when I was 18, in my room in high school. I just read those passages differently. It's because a lot in my life has changed since then. So when we meditate on Scripture, when we just simply create space to read it and think about it and ponder it. Again, it's similar to the contemplative prayer where we just read the passage. Maybe it's a few verses, maybe it's a whole chapter. And we just sit and we say, Spirit, what do you have for me? And we just create that space to ponder, to think through it, to actually wonder about it, to create kind of that narrative in our minds. When we create that space, we actually begin to not just know things about that passage, but actually grow to love the things about that passage. And in Matthew 7, Jesus says, hey, there are going to be people who will come to me and be like, we did all this stuff for you. He's going to say, depart, for I never knew you. And I think for a lot of people in today's church, you'd say, hey, depart. You just know a lot of things about me. And I think meditating on Scripture helps us bridge that gap of just knowing things about Jesus to actually knowing him, knowing his teachings, knowing the story that we are a part of. So meditation. The second is memorization. Throwback to all the Awana days where you got awards for memorizing Scripture. I never did that. I just somehow faked it, and I got a lot of awards. So there you go. I'm a great example of what not to do in Awana. But memorization is imprinting the teachings of Jesus in Scripture on your mind. Imprinting the teachings of Jesus in Scripture on our mind. So in times of chaos, what is inside of us is what comes out, right? So when things go crazy, what is inside of us is what comes out. And so we memorize Scripture not to be like, hey, look at me, I've memorized this whole section. But that when moments of chaos happen, we have something imprinted on our brains to actually call forward into our lives and help us see the things going on around us differently. The average Jewish boy or girl by the age of 10 would have had the entire Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They would have had that memorized by the age of 10 or 12. I did not have that memorized by the age of 10 or 12, believe it or not, and I would say most of us have not either. But the reason for that was there was no question. They knew the story they were a part of. For them, it wasn't just a list of facts memorized. It was a story, a narrative that was not just something, again, that they could point to and tell you facts about, but that was in them and that they were a part of. And when we memorize Scripture, it helps us actually imprint the story and the teachings inside of us to not just, again, be able to point to facts, but actually have it be a part of us. It's in who we are. It is what comes out, when chaos happens around us, when craziness happens. It is what we turn to. And so with meditation and memorization, we use Scripture as this tool for intimacy, this tool for us to, again, to experience God on a regular basis. Again, there are other ways to read Scripture. There are other ways to use Scripture. There is definitely a place to understand the deep things that is going on in the Bible. But I think for most people in most places, during most times, meditation and memorization can do wonders for how we interact with Scripture and forming our relationship with God.